Get started. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me yet again on Pastor's Positive Mental Health Institute. Here with another wonderful guest. As I'm sure all of them are wonderful. And so I look forward to you listening to this or watching it. And please like, share, and subscribe. And so I want to get into it because I'm excited about Reverend Dr. Mark Hannemann. Is that how you pronounce that, Mark?
That's right.
Yeah, and so he is the executive director of Good Friend Ministries. I have to be honest with you, until Dr. Greg Walton kind of alerted me to who you were, I'd never heard of Good Friend Ministries. So I'm looking forward to hearing a lot about that. But before we get into that, I just kind of want you to kind of share your story a little bit. I know you're an ordained pastor. I'd kind of like to know, what gave you the call to ministry? How did you know you were called? And just kind of that journey, if you'd just take us down that for a little bit.
No, happy to do that. Thanks, Kirk, for the invitation to come and visit with you today. So it goes back 40 years when I started, 1984, in the south central region of South Dakota. My first call out of the seminary from St. Louis. I graduated in 1984. My dad before me from St. Louis in 1948. So we just swapped our numbers. If my memory was better, I would tell you when my great-grandfather Heinrich graduated from Springfield, but I always forget that year. So we've got pastors in our heritage. For me, in my own journey, I really never thought about doing anything else. With my dad as a pastor, my oldest brother, 10 years older than me, he was a pastor, went into the ministry. And now I have two sons who are pastors and counselors like myself, and my brother-in-law is a pastor. So all around the circle, my other brother's been music director at Lutheran churches his whole career as well. So for us, it's just everybody in the family.
Yeah.
And when it comes to our Lutheran heritage. My wife and I graduated from Concordia University in Seward in 1980. And then subsequently, all four of our children and their four spouses graduated from Concordia Seward. So we are, as a family, 10 for 10. And when we sat around one day at a family get together and tried to nail down all the members of those five families who have gone to Concordia, we lost count at 28 graduates of Concordia Seward. So, well, I grew up in Nebraska. My dad started in 1962, 63, Faith Lutheran Church in York, Nebraska. I was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Dad was a church planter in Wyoming as well. Started Our Savior Lutheran Church in Cheyenne, where I was born. And then when I was just a little before kindergarten, we moved to York, where he was the founding pastor at Faith Lutheran there. And so one formative experience for me is my dad had hurt his leg, had his leg in a cast. And this was when I was about 15 years old, and he needed help. And he let me lead some worship and read the lessons. I remember he had a stool in the pulpit that he kind of hobbled up there and sat in to preach his sermon. But that was a very meaningful experience that I had as a 15-year-old, just to be in the chancel helping my dad out a little bit. And like I said, I never really thought about doing anything else. I went to Concordia in their education program, elementary education, went student teaching, never planned on being a teacher. I just thought that education background would be outstanding, great prelude to going to seminary and serving in the ministry, because schools are so much a part of our heritage. Mm-hmm. And some of that educational background really served me well for one slice of my ministry. After I served in South Dakota for a couple of years out of the seminary, I went to Minneapolis Lutheran High School, served as dean of chapel, instructor of religion. And so that was a great experience of teaching high school level kids at that point. And that's where I started my counseling journey as well. I got a Doctor of Ministry degree at Luther Seminary there in those days, or just after I left there, and spent really the bulk of my time at my next call in Michigan, counseling. I got all of my hours. There was plenty of work to do in our congregation. I was serving a congregation that was sizable in the Frankenmuth area of Michigan, that Saginaw Valley. We always joked there that there were more Lutherans than there were people. Our church was 1,800 members strong in a town of 1,300. So you do the math on that. These Lutherans are coming from somewhere out of the woodwork in that in that part of Michigan for sure. Anyway, so went from Seward to St. Louis and just enjoyed the seminary experience and the vicarage experience here in Michigan. I was just at that congregation yesterday at a conference of pastors in the North and East region of Michigan. There are 3 pastors' conferences, about 500 pastors, active pastors in Michigan. So they split up the pastors in 3 different spring conferences. But I was over there, wonderful worship service in that sanctuary that I served in as a vicar way back when, 82, 80, 83. Ministry's been dynamic, exciting, varied, from serving in the parish to serving as the instructor at the high school to leading a counseling ministry in West St. Louis County for one of our larger churches there in the early 2000s. But most of the years as a parish pastor. But since I got my counseling license in 1995, rather, I've been sort of marrying that work in that parish setting. So always been about pastoral care and counseling, the Stephen ministry programs in 3 of the churches that I've served. And so that's really been a main focus of mine in ministry. And then 12 years ago, my son and I started Grace Point Institute for Relational Health in Omaha. And it just started with him. He's a marriage and family therapist and a graduate of St. Louis Seminary as well. He got his counseling training at St. Louis University while he was going to the seminary, came out, and he was a vicar with us. And then he transitioned into this full-time counseling ministry called Grace Point. And we started with just him in a house, visiting with folks for counseling care. And that has transitioned into offices in 3 cities in Nebraska: Omaha, Lincoln, and Columbus. And then my other son, Aaron, joined us just last year. So he serves half-time as a pastor of a small church and then runs our counseling ministry in Columbus, Nebraska. And so it's another family endeavor in ministry, in the care of souls, sales sorga at the deeper levels. And all of our therapists, we have about 12 counselors on our team now, and all of them are LCMS church work connected folks. Wives of pastors, DCE trained, pastors themselves. And so our DNA is such that we have served a lot of LCMS church workers from coast to coast, from California to Florida, coming to be served through our ministry, especially marriage intensives or assessments that we do for pastors mainly.
Yeah, that's great. So before we move on, because I want to hear more about the work that you're doing currently, but so here you are 15 and you're helping your dad out. And I'm so thrilled about the just the heritage that you have. I watched my grandfather lead music when I was a kid, and my dad always served and taught Bible study, and so my brother's a pastor at a church in Northern California, and I'm a pastor, and it's just kind of this family thing that you serve the Lord.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you could maybe share. My son's a pastor, but I wonder if you could share. Because I want to encourage pastors in this, because I think that sometimes it's easy for pastors to be decent pastors in the pulpit and good, but sometimes the family gets a little bit left alone or neglected. And so a lot of times pastors' kids, the statistics will say, kind of don't want anything to do with the ministry, but yet here you are in a family that just has this heritage of generation after generation. Is there anything that maybe you could look to or point to for us that says this is kind of why I thought that it was good, and maybe why my kids thought it was a good thing to do?
Like I indicated earlier, I really never thought of doing anything else. You know, as kids, we entertain all sorts of visions of what we might do when we grow up. And I really never thought of doing anything else. So it's hard to really point to some sort of formative moment. Although when I was 15, that was a taste of a chancel ministry, at least. What that might be like to serve in God's house that way. But I think more than anything else, what has been formative for our family is just sort of a Christ-centered, Christ-focused, Christ-serving life that we see in the family tree right along, and especially with my mom and dad. My dad served actively until he died of leukemia 6 months after diagnosis when he was 80 years old in 2004. So he got leukemia. They weren't really able to help him. That clock was ticking, and 6 months later, he went to be with Jesus. But he, in the in-between time, went to a nursing home. He was serving Christ Lutheran Church in Norfolk, Nebraska in those days. And he just kept serving as long as he could. And even after he then became a resident of one of the nursing homes that he took communion for the residents to, they put on his door identification, Pastor Hannemann. Rather than Norman, they put Pastor Hannemann because that's the only way that nursing home ever knew him, because he would come every single month for years bringing communion to the residents. And so a life lived in honor of Jesus, dedicated to service, being faithful. And if there's one thing my dad always would say to us in ministry and in life, it doesn't matter, ministry or a life pursuing other kinds of career paths, but it's about being faithful to Christ, faithful to your calling. And that has stuck with all of us, I think, over the years. Just that encouragement from Dad that you have one job, and it's to be faithful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that what you're speaking to is something that maybe some pastors struggle with, but that is that the person that you see in the pulpit is also the person you see at home. And that's, I think, what you've experienced is you experience the consistency of a life that is directed to Christ at all times, not perfect, but the draw, man after God's own heart, as David was called, is that's the pursuit that you saw. And I think that a lot of times that's what our kids want, is that they want to know that who dad is at church is also the same as the dad that I see at home. And it sounds like that's kind of the culture and just the life that you lived. And so that's really important. And I want to encourage pastors and church members, let the pastor be the pastor at all, in the pulpit and outside the pulpit. Let him be himself. And we don't want you probably will get this in a minute, but pastors deal with imposter syndrome a lot. And I think you find that a whole lot more when the pastor's life outside of the pulpit is radically different than the life inside the pulpit. They wrestle with that a whole lot more. And so what I'd like to know about is currently you're with the executive director of Good Friends Ministries. And by the way, and 14 grandchildren. That's pretty impressive. So that might keep you busy at times, right?
It takes a bit to keep track of all 14 of them and what's going on.
Yeah. But tell me about this Good Friend Ministry, what you do, what you love about it, and why it's so beneficial for people to know about.
So I was in Omaha minding my own business, serving as a pastor at the Divine Shepherd Lutheran Church, where I served for 14 years. I was intending to just sort of work my way out and retire from that place of service. And then out of the blue, a phone call first came from Michigan, from an old pastor friend of mine who is the chairman of the board of directors of this newly formed nonprofit ministry, a 501c3 called Good Friend Ministries. And they were looking for someone to lead the establishment of this ministry. And so Rick Wolfram remembered me from days in the Saginaw Valley. He served in Saginaw and I served in Millington, Michigan. And he knew I was into counseling. So he reached out and one thing led to another. And so I received a call as they became an RSO of Synod and could issue a call. They issued a call, and then my wife and I, Sandy and I, came about 2 years ago this time to get this ministry started. And so that's the short story of me ending up here. I was so compelled by the vision, and the vision primarily is from Faye Pickelman. Faye and Luke Pickelman own the property where Good Friend Ministry does its work. They have a 3-bedroom bed and breakfast that serves as the place where our pastors and wives come and stay for 2 days, up to 5 days. And there's no cost for lodging, for breakfast every morning, or any of my services, whether I'm counseling, I'm consulting, I'm coaching, spending time with them when they are here. And I do aftercare through Zoom calls as well for these pastors and wives. And so we caught the vision and now had to put that into action. And so we host retreats for pastors and wives of the Michigan district. Pastors can come by themselves too, or the wives for that matter, if that's that happens to be the circumstance. But the singles are very, very rare in these 2 years. It's always couples, which I'm very thankful for. You know, that they come together, that they can get some rest together, to have some unique experiences around the Traverse City area. This is quite a tourist destination with a lot of things to do here in the Traverse City, Michigan area. It's well known in the state and in the region for its beauty and for tasting rooms. On this little peninsula, 2 miles wide and 17 miles long, we have at least 13 tasting rooms here, and the buses come bringing folks for the wineries and the tasting rooms here. But the natural beauty, we are nestled between the 2 bays of Grand Traverse Bay, Lake Michigan, on either side of us. So anywhere we go on this peninsula, we see this beautiful blue water. It's a lovely setting, very peaceful, great place to run, to hike, to bike, to be in nature, to see God's creation, to just take some time away. And it really is away from most of our population. Most of Michigan lives in the lower third of the lower peninsula, and we're up here a ways, maybe better than 3 hours from Detroit. You know, so it is a hike for folks to get here, but they're always glad that they came because it is truly a breath of fresh air, literally and figuratively, to be away. You know, it's one thing to go 20, 30 minutes down the road and try to catch a break, but for pastors and wives, I think the more that they can get into an entirely different setting where they can clear their head, do a little up periscope, have a conversation. And some of my conversations, I talk with everyone who comes, of course, sometimes just for an hour or so, just to get acquainted. How you doing in ministry? What's life like? How's your family? And that's it. And then they go off and do the things that they want to do, or they sleep, or they rest, or they read. But others have greater needs. And so we go from that experience of an hour conversation to maybe a 3-day marriage intensive where I'm spending up to 12, 13, 14 hours over 3 days, packing in 6 months of counseling into a space of 3 days for those that really have something to work on, where there's issues that really need a lot of attention. And that's just the best way to really get at something and chart a new course. So it's been a privilege to work with this population. Of course, we have been for many years. Grace Point focuses on church workers, but here it's pastors and wives exclusively because of the limitations of our inn. If we had a Hampton Inn and more resources and more staff, we could have a lot of all the church workers come. But we're sort of limited here, and the vision for Faye was to serve these pastors, Faye and Luke. The reason I mentioned Faye in particular, she is finishing a master's degree in spiritual formation at Regent University, in addition to her duties as a mom of three and the winemaker for Soul Squeeze Wine, which her and her husband founded about a dozen years ago. They moved from Lansing up here. He's an attorney, she's an accountant, and they decided to raise their kids up here in the rural environment of the Old Mission Peninsula and make wine. So last year, Sandy and I helped in the fall do the harvest, 25 tons of grapes off this property that had no grapes a dozen years ago. Soul Squeeze, because their soul actually did get squeezed. They lost their vines the first 2 years of operation, one with hail and the other with wind. So it was a soul squeezing event for sure. Their vineyard is called Misfits Vineyard, but they've been quite successful because now recently they became the official wine of the Detroit Pistons. And so in the Performance Center, there's their brand. So they've done very, very well by the grace of God. And they certainly give God all the credit for all that has happened in that work of theirs. But their generosity in providing this space and this place for this ministry is a testament to their love for Jesus and love for God's servants in the church as well. They grew up in a Lutheran church over by Saginaw and went to Valley Lutheran High School together, and just have a heart for the Lord and His servants.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think is really important, and that I would like to share that message is that church members would just have an awareness and an understanding of the pressure that church workers and pastors take, and then you said pastors' wives especially. I think that they get kind of forgotten at times pretty easily.
Yes.
And the simple things that church members can do, really, they're not that difficult to really help the pastor be encouraged, be excited about the future. Pastors, I've always said, aren't very complex. It doesn't take a whole lot, but specific gratitude is really important. Pastor, I thank you because you said this and it made a difference. Or you said something that made me think about this. Just listening to their needs and providing for them and it could be something as simple as, here's a round of golf. I hear you like to golf. I know it's expensive. Here, go. Or I'll take you golfing or something, or, just little things. And so that's one of the things that I like to emphasize is it doesn't take a whole lot, and helping people say, just be thinking about it and praying about how you can bless the pastor, especially praying for your pastor. So you have these people come now. Do you only serve Michigan, or can people come from anywhere?
So our board made a decision at my encouragement to expand our service to folks outside the Michigan district, clergy couples who may be facing particular challenges in life or in ministry. So that we have done. And so we will receive other clergy couples, kind of word of mouth or through district presidents know that we're here. And so we work with those on a one-on-one basis, individually, make arrangements, accommodations for them. Sometimes folks who are on sabbatical, we would give a green light because that's a real time to consider where they've been, where they're going, and that too, we try to open the door and to help our ministry or to bless this ministry. A lot of times folks who come from outside the district sort of understand who we are and what we're set up to do for the Michigan district. And so they will make a gift to the ministry of whatever they choose that helps offset our costs. Yeah, so it's worked out well, and it is expanding a bit. We're receiving a few more from outside the district who might have those kind of special considerations and needs.
Oh, good. So what are some of the challenges you have found that face pastors?
The things for me that seem to rise to the surface are twofold. It's always about what's going on at church and on a church staff or with the people, and what stressors are driving folks to maybe a hard place in their life of coping, or the stress level, or just the work level getting really high because of complications due to maybe past leaders who have created situations of great conflict or trouble in the parish. There are too many of those stories, where folks have left in their wake church workers who should have been faithful to Christ and to that local congregation, kind of went off the rails and made a whole lot of trouble. And that trouble then perpetuates itself if it isn't addressed very well. So there are those situations, certainly in congregations, along with just the routine things of having enough money or enough people to make things go. There are increasing number of churches that just cannot afford a full-time pastor. And so the SMP pastors, or the retired guys. I was at this conference this week and visited with an 80-year-old pastor who's still at it full-time because he just feels compelled, because there's no one else to do it. And so it goes. We see an increasing number of those folks who are just going the extra mile to serve, and retirement really isn't so much in their vocabulary. Maybe they've scaled back a bit, but they're keeping very busy. And honestly, it sort of keeps them alive and keeps them going and keeps them sharp. I think about Moses. He got started in ministry at 80. That's when he got started, right? Yeah. And so a lot of other folks think, well, when that retirement clock hits at 65, 6, 7, or 8, then I'm done. Well, that's hard to do. I think most pastors find that hard to do. Part of our work here, I've found, is to work with pastors in that retirement transition. Maybe they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out and wonder what's life going to look like after ministry. Well, usually there's something else coming. I've developed a one-sheet biblical model of making it through these transitions in ministry with an eye toward having a good ending wherever you're at, and a wonderful new beginning, whatever that might be, whatever shape that might take, whatever form that might be. And it might be altogether different than parish ministry, but I don't know that we ever leave ministry, do we? There's always something that the Lord is going to call us to, where we can make a difference for others in the name of Jesus. So truly in ministry, there really is no hard stop retirement, at least not in my view. I didn't grow up that way, and I don't think that way. It's just about, what else would you have me do, Lord? Maybe out of this normal parish life situation and into something else where you can use all of that experience and skills to bless others, or bless your colleagues as well, because I think pastors need good support. Pastors need retired pastors, maybe even in their pews, that really encourage them rather than make trouble for them. And I've had both in my ministry, both and. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think some of the challenges that we have, especially for pastors that have been in the ministry for years, is an identity issue. Their identity is so caught up in being a pastor that once you take that away, even coming and sitting in the pews is very difficult for them, because they've never sat in the pews, right? Unless it's a conference or something, and then it's different. And so I know that that's a struggle. And that's why I always encourage pastors to make sure you have some hobbies, have some interests outside of the church, and not that those hobbies are going to consume you when you step back or you scale back your ministry, but at least you'll have something that you can do and enjoy, that can have that good balance. Because I do love the fact that a lot of these pastors keep serving, but the reality is they can't serve at the pace as they did when they were 40, 50 years old. Now that they're 80, you've got to be honest and scale it back. And whatnot. And so how have you seen, so we have all these challenges that you see over and over again, and they're fairly common. You got finances, you have conflict, you have just emotional exhaustion at times, and things like that. How do you see church members playing a role in helping with those challenges? What would be your exhortation, your encouragement to church members?
A while back, I worked with Dave Anderson. Maybe you know Dave at Shepherd's Canyon Retreat, and I've been out there and have served out there. We launched a project years ago called the Pastor People Project. And we did a video and I wrote a study to really try to help bridge the gap between pastors and congregation members. And the main message is that pastors are people too, right? They're the same as everyone else with the similar challenges and unique challenges of living in that fishbowl, which is the parish ministry, where family is under some scrutiny more than most, and that can be very challenging. And I appreciated what you said before about specific gratefulness to the pastor, like whatever he might have done that was a blessing or said that touched you, to be specific about that. Thank you for this, or thank you for that. I've kept, somebody said a long time ago to me, do you have a blue file? And I said, well, I have blue file folders. What are you talking about? No, a blue file. Well, what is that? And they said, well, it's a file that you look into when you're feeling blue, right? And it's filled with kind notes or remembrances, or something someone has written to you, or maybe emailed to you or texted to you, and you put it in print and put it in this folder, and then pull it out on occasion and see that you're not such a bad human being or a terrible pastor, that somebody has appreciated what you have done in the past, right? And it's a reminder that you've been blessed, by people. And the reality is, most people aren't going to do that. And the older I've gotten and the farther along I've gotten in ministry, the more I just tell myself, you're really not that big a deal, and you're not that important. And that church that you were serving is going to be there long after you're gone, by the grace of God. So do what you can do when you have time to do it, and you won't do it perfectly. You make a lot of mistakes, for which when you're on the way out, be sure and say you're sorry for messing this thing up or the other, or for any bad decisions you made or any neglect there. And that this grace and forgiveness and love of Christ should characterize pastor and people relationships, right? That this is the center, and to be at odds, with your pastor or with decisions that are made. One of the ways that I tried to, over the years at least, to avoid as much as possible is that I won't make a decision unless I got the leadership at my back, supporting what it is I'm proposing. I want to do reconnaissance behind the scenes for maybe a long time. Sometimes it's a very long time. It can be years that I'm working behind the scenes to line things up, especially for big decisions. I've led a church relocation, sell this building, move to a new property. Right? We planted a church, or big campaigns or whatever, or endeavors that really take everybody's effort, and one campaign after another. And I think the critical thing always is that the leadership's on your side, and they've bought into what you're putting forward, and so that you're not out there all alone, wondering why nobody's following you, when you haven't even bothered, right, to get the leadership on your side, or for them to see the vision of what it is you're putting forward. So I think that's a critical piece, is working with the leadership of your congregation, and to develop good, close working relationship there with that group of people. That's a critical group, that every pastor has to work with, not to fight them, and not to major in minors, right? I mean, there's way too many pastors and people that want to major in minors, and that's just not healthy, and it's not worth it. I mean, there's people dying in our communities every day, not knowing Jesus, or a lot of folks showing up from foreign shores who don't know Jesus, and if that can't be our focus, we're really missing the boat, right? We're looking at ourselves and our own building rather than the people who need this good news that in Christ their sins are forgiven and they can be set free.
I like that, major on the majors and minor on the minors. And I like the, I think, looking at it's not my church, it's our church together. And so we work together. And, I kind of have the idea is I want to lead, but I don't want to drag people, nor do I want to push them. I want to walk together. I might set the pace at times as the pastor,
Yeah.
but I want to walk together in this. And so I just love that idea of how do we work together. And one of the things I just want to point out is for church members listening to this, write a note to your pastor. I mean, not
Yeah.
and write a positive one and sign it. Don't write a negative one without your signature. Those go to a different file. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and that's really important. And then for pastors, I want one of the things that I do for pastors when they go through my conferences and seminars is I give them a tool at the end that really I encourage them to reference at least weekly if they can. And it kind of walks through, hey, how did somebody do this week for me in each of those components of positive mental health? And so at the end, they can go, okay, it wasn't all negative. It wasn't all tragedy. It wasn't all conflict. There were a lot of these things because a lot of times we don't see them because we don't take the time to see them. And so that file, that blue file, is really important. But there's other tools that and I'm happy to give those to anybody who wants them. It helps if you go through the seminar first, but you can figure it out without that. It's not again. It's kind of like when I interview pastors. Even though you are one, I'm talking about your ministry more than that. One of the things, the last thing I ask them is, how has a church member made you smile in the last 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just fun to watch the pastors. Just you can see they're thinking about which moment do I want to share, and that there has been more than one moment, and some of them just rise to the top and the joy that they get from that. And I think as pastors, it's really important that we pause, and church workers too, and take the moment to allow the Holy Spirit to lead us to those moments, because He's given us the body, right? We're part of the body. And in Ephesians 4 says we're supposed to grow up together to build one another up in love. And so we need to look at how Paul often, says, I think this person and that person, for they refreshed my spirit. And so I think it's important that we understand that as pastors, God has given us the gift of the body that the Holy Spirit uses to encourage us. And so what do you think is the biggest thing right now that church members can do to help pastors? What are you seeing? What's something that's kind of been consistent?
As I reflect on many of the conversations that I've had, we've had about 100 retreats in the last 2 years.
Oh.
And so you had a chance to visit with a lot of clergy couples. And I think one of the things is that the pastor and wife know that people have their back, that they're cared for, that they're protected, that people will put the best construction on everything. Those faithful, solid church members, we wouldn't survive without them.
Yeah.
The folks that show up for every Wednesday Lenten service, those people, right? That are with you no matter what. And maybe they can be a bit antagonistic at times, or have different opinions, or speak up at a voters meeting, but they're with you and they're with Jesus, and they're faithful to their calling in the church and in their own conduct of the work of ministry that the Lord has called them to. And without those folks, that sort of foundation stones of the church, I don't know how we would do. But I think, like you're saying, those that just treat us like human beings, or ask how we're doing, or how the family's doing, or take an interest, or Pastor, you and your family are in my prayers. I don't know what goes farther than to be told that we're praying for you. That has put wind in my sails quite a few times over the years, is just to know that folks are in prayer, especially through difficult days or challenging days, or hard meetings, or difficult passages that maybe you've gone through, that the folks who come alongside you or connect with you, that's a real blessing. Or they make an appointment to come talk and just say, I feel bad about what happened. Just to consider that pastors and their families have feelings too, and these things that happen in a church really affects us probably more than anybody, because we go back there every day, right? We're always there. You may come once or twice a week, but we're there every day, sort of in the middle of it, so yeah, very thankful for those people. And it's like we can't live for pats on the back or notes in the blue file, but when they come, they're such a blessing, right? You don't live for it, but you're so thankful for it, because as a pastor, sometimes you wonder, it's like you get the microphone, hit the microphone. Is anybody hearing anything that I'm saying ever,
Yeah, no,
So
that's true.
even negative feedback is good sometimes. Oh, good, you listened.
At
You
least you
hated what
listen.
I said, but you heard it. Thank you
Oh,
for that.
no, that's
You know.
good. And and I want to encourage church members, pray for your pastors and let them know you're praying for them. Because what that says is, because so much of the work of the ministry feels what I would say very unilateral. We tend to, we're pouring out. And when we do deal with people, a lot of times, this is my coin, that when they come to counsel or come to talk to us, they spiritually vomit all over us.
Yeah.
And then they feel better, but here we're stuck with it, right? But to know, and then in our society, we're such consumer driven, and church has become that to some degree, where people just want, what can I get out of it? And so to know that someone's taking their time, giving up their time to follow the prompting of the Holy Spirit and pray for their pastor, means
Mhm.
that, well, maybe I'm doing something right. The sacred work that I feel that I'm leading with my heart, they're actually responding, and they're putting aside their personal desires or whatever, and taking the time to pray for me, and that speaks volumes. And I think as pastors, that's one of the things we want to know more than anything, is that our congregation cares enough to pray, because when they're praying for their pastor, they can hear from the Holy
Mhm.
Spirit to go, how can I really help my pastor? And maybe
Yeah.
they get some insight into something they had no clue about. We've had some tragedies in my time here at this church, and one of them was a young man who committed suicide, and it was so
Mm.
nice. I had a couple people every couple of days just text me, say, "How are you doing? We're concerned about you," and it just meant so much to me,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and it actually strengthened me, and I think that's doing their part in the body to strengthen one
Yep.
another, build one another up. So
Yep. Yep.
it's important,
Yeah.
and don't think that little text, it doesn't mean a whole lot to a
Yeah.
pastor. So no,
Kirk,
that's
I would ask
sure.
Kirk, I would ask you, what do you think sort of hinders that um, side of the two-way communication, pastor to people, one direction, but people to pastor? What, in your experience, would you say sort of gets in the way of people just sort of stepping out there or reaching out or texting or calling or writing a note? What did do you have a sense of what might keep that from happening?
Sure. I think number one is just understanding what God's word says. So we'll start there. That's the basic. But I really think, and I never like to put a guilt trip on pastors or put a lot on, but pastors, they wrestle with, we come from the congregation. We're part of the congregation, or out of the congregation, if you want to call it that way. I don't like that term as much, but and we are part of the congregation. We're a sheep, just like they're a sheep. But I think sometimes pastors, due to necessarily maybe past hurts, or maybe their inability to balance relationships and pastor, withhold engaging in vulnerable is the word I'm going to use, but
Yeah.
genuine vulnerable relationships with church members. And so it becomes this almost a role of, well, that's pastor and I'm just this, for the church
Hmm.
member. And again, it's a tension, right? To have a friend or have friends in the church, is really for a pastor. There's a great tension there. There's a lot of seminaries say you can't have friends. And the reality is there is it's hard to have real friends. And sometimes I have a church member who's a friend. He's one of our elders, and he goes, it was harder for me to think of you as a friend because you're my pastor than probably it was for you. And I have one pastor friend that I like a lot. He said, he goes, he goes, sometimes I have these friends and I'll just say, hey, for this conversation, I'm putting my pastor hat on. You just need to know that. And so, and I look at
Yeah.
it this way, and how I've helped some guys through it is like, my wife comes to my church. She's a church member, but she's also my wife, and I'm also her pastor. So there's a
Yeah.
tension there, right? And so again, so investment in that, but I think hurts from a lot of pastors is they just don't want to be known. And in order for church members to truly help their pastors, pastors need to be real. They need
Yeah.
to they need to be honest about their inabilities, their shortcomings. They need to be honest and profess those and confess those. That hey, I blew it. I'm so sorry. I thought I was making the right decision. I wasn't. Will you forgive me? Help me move
Yeah.
forward. So I think it's a challenge. Again, for various reasons, but I think I always try to encourage pastors. You don't have to be besties with everybody in your church, but you need to be real with them, and you need to have real relationship with them. I think that a majority of ministry, I love Sunday mornings. I'm not trying to disparage Bible study or Sunday mornings, but I find some of the best ministry comes when you're laboring together, you're hanging out and things that you like to do together, and you can have some conversations that you wouldn't have before or after a service on Sunday.
Right.
And so I always encourage pastors seek those opportunities. And for church members to go, what does your pastor like to do? Or what do you think he needs to know how to do? Take him with you. People know I don't like to camp. And so, that Holiday Inn Express is my idea of roughing it. we
Our son, I wanted to mention to you, our son, who's not a pastor, he lives in Colorado. He's a physician. He's a radiologist, works at home, on his screens, but they go to a neighboring Lutheran church. And this last winter, he took his pastor out skiing with him to the mountains. And what a blessing. I had to imagine what a blessing that was for the pastor to have just somebody in his church take him somewhere and do something fun. It's stuff like that.
No, exactly. And you need to have, there's always that concern, well, the pastor's going to have favorites. Well, the pastor can extend love to everybody, but click with some more than others, just on a relational level. And we need to not feel guilty about that. And sometimes I find when I really know somebody, and they would be considered a friend, I can actually minister to them and speak into their life in better ways because I know. But it's one of those things that when I was interviewing pastors, this always came up, and it was like when someone invites you over to their house, your first thought is, okay, what do you want? So really the second invite to socialize is really the most important one, because they've already had that, hey, we broke the ice, I just want to know you as a person. Now the next time we get together, that nervousness or hesitation is gone, and we can really enjoy true fellowship with one another. It's a tough thing. I get that. It's a tough thing. I mean, you don't want to. Yeah, go ahead.
You just have to accept that there are risks involved. The closer you get to somebody, especially people in leadership, there's great potential there for somebody to turn on you, right? Judases still exist. People can get betrayed. We better not be the ones doing the betraying, in our role on our part. But people can, if some folks are such that if things are going the way they really would like to see them go in the church, all is well, and all is well with the pastor. But if pastor opposes something, or then the relationship can really be impacted negatively. People get their noses bent out of shape, and that can be real problematic. I know my dad, in his wisdom, would always say, as a pastor, you're everybody's friend and nobody's friend.
Yeah.
Oh, well, which is it, Dad? Everybody's friend or nobody's friend? Well, he just said, you got to be so careful about getting too close to anybody, because of the relationship. In counseling, we call it dual relationships. As a counselor, I may see somebody at the mall that's my counselee, and I'm headed the other direction because I do not want to mess up this other relationship that I have with them. I don't want to reveal that because I have confidentiality to maintain. But in the pastoral role, it's just different because you're just so immersed into people's lives in hospital rooms and in situations of loss and grief, and I mean these vulnerable situations where even you as a pastor are vulnerable. It's hard to hold back tears, maybe a dear member or a suicide or whatever. And that part about being vulnerable, I think, is so critical. Would this pastor say, ouch, if I pinched him? I mean, they can be,
Right.
No chinks in the armor, Well, no, there's plenty of chinks
Yeah.
in the armor, but there's a balance about being too open, too vulnerable, too much about your life, or nothing. It's all or nothing. No, somewhere in the middle. Stay out of the ditches on either side of that whole thing. But yeah, to be a real person with hurts and struggles and trouble and sickness and all that.
Yeah, and we can do that from the pulpit really easily too. I mean, I've been in services where the pastor almost seems like a robot just going through the divine
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
But I think it's really incumbent upon, there's me, again, my background is I was familiar with Lutheranism because of my father-in-law being an LCMS pastor for so many years, but I didn't understand a lot of what we do. And so coming to it the last 5 years, I can get really excited about pieces of the liturgy that we do and say, how great is that this sustained the church for this many years and we get to participate.
Yeah.
So when we say communion of the saints in our creed, they were saying some of these things 2000 a thousand years ago, and how that connects us. And so I think, but even in your sermon presentation or when you're praying for the people of the church, saying, really caring. It's not just here's their name and moving on. And I find myself, just for sake of time, well, let me just name all these people. They're struggling with this. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Let's move on, right?
Uh-huh. Right.
And instead saying, even in that moment, before the whole congregation, they see you as someone who's real, real feelings like them. And I think you
Yeah.
can connect over that because they're like, okay, he is like me. He
Yeah.
feels, he hurts. And so anyway. Well, great. This has been a great conversation. I'm gonna, if it's okay, I can put your website on the comments for this, and
Yeah.
people can check you
Good
out.
friend. Yeah. Goodfriendministries.org. Yeah.
Yep. Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Mark, I appreciate the conversation so much. Just pray that God continues to richly bless your ministry, that you would help people enjoy Jesus. That's always what I try to tell people is may God richly bless you and enjoy Jesus and then go share life. I mean, that's kind of my motto.
Very good.
But in this, I love what we do, and we can work together to build the one another up in love and help the church flourish. So thanks again, Mark. God bless.
Yeah, you're welcome, Kirk. And thank you, and blessings on all that you do to have conversations, meaningful conversations with a lot of folks and get that word out.
Will do. Thanks.